Gingrich, Fox News political analyst and former Speaker of the House, author of the upcoming book, March to the Majority. Great to have you in focus. So your first reaction to our latest octogenarian now and his move to run?
Well, I mean, what's he going to do? He has a White House, Air Force One, Marine One. He's not going to go back home and just sit in Delaware.
Well, he does that a lot.
But I don't think he cares. I think his view is he is the president. He thinks he can beat Trump, and he thinks that nobody can beat him for the nomination. And he's probably right. I can't imagine anyone defeating Biden for the Democratic nomination. So whether or not the country likes it, this is what they've got. They've got a guy who has a huge cloud of corruption. It gets bigger and bigger the more the House Republicans dig into the details. This is a guy who has tried to coerce the country on everything from transgender issues to climate issues to the border. And this is a guy who, frankly, has run a pretty incompetent administration, which is why most Americans think America's in decline, and most Americans think that we need a different approach. But he is where he is, and he doesn't intend to leave unless you defeat him. He's not going voluntarily.
So talk to me, if you could, and we don't have to go too long on this because you just gave a long range of reasons why he has headwind, but why doesn't the headwind work against him? Why do you think it's almost a foregone conclusion that he'll win?
Well, I think, first of all, the elite media protects him every chance it can. NPR just did a piece on his announcement and said, oh, gee, there are no scandals involved. Well, how can you watch everything we're learning about Hunter Biden and the entire Biden family, about millions of dollars of money, Russia, China, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, et cetera, and say there are no scandals? But part of his protection is an elite media that hates Trump so much that they will do everything they can to protect Joe Biden. Second, on the left, they hate Trump so much, they'd much prefer Biden. So he may be able to run the equivalent of the basement campaign of 2020, sit in the Rose Garden, do almost nothing, and count on the underlying forces to take him to victory. But the polling numbers are very dangerous. When you have as many people saying they don't want him to run, including Democrats, it's a problem.
Yeah, they're stubborn. It may not be somebody from the right that causes him a headache. It may be, a Kennedy who decides to run, and that just happened over the weekend, just to cause trouble. Who knows? Or maybe he's absolutely serious. A new op-ed out with the title, Biden's 4 more years sounds like a prison term. And Americans seem to agree with that. In a large survey, the Pew Research Center found a large majority feel America is a country in decline. So we've seen that. Large majorities say that by 2050, we will be worse off when it comes to the economy, America's importance in the world, domestic political division, and the wealth gap between the rich and poor. And if that were not enough, nearly 60% say that people like them are worse off now than they were 50 years ago. So basically, your brothers and sisters who grew up in a household 50 years ago, your grandparents now, and you're looking back and you're looking forward and saying, I think it's worse now.
Well, look, I just did a podcast at Gingrich 360 where I said flatly, if we don't have profound reform of our bureaucracies, we are going to decay, period. Whether it's the Pentagon, the school system, the Department of Transportation. The fact is our bureaucracies are tired, they're incompetent, they're filled with red tape, they're not getting the job done. And of course, nobody in the Democratic Party is going to take on the public employee unions, and nobody in the Democratic Party is going to take on the teachers unions. So we're right now going to continue to decay unless we get a really decisive election in which the American people choose profound change. And that we'll see if that can happen in 2024. But without profound change, this is a country that will not be the leading country in the world in the next 20 or 25 years.
Well, and there's some argument over whether or not that particular country is now China. And you could sit and talk for hours for some of the reasons why that might be a compelling argument to make. We just hope it's never true. President Biden still refusing to negotiate on the debt ceiling. So this is something that's more immediate than years down the road. This is something that Biden could actually show his leadership chops. He could bring people together, like just one, the Speaker of the House, McCarthy. If he refuses to give in and talk with House Speaker McCarthy, we could be staring down a default. Analysts say that could come as soon as mid-June, and the Speaker last week laid out his bill, detailed it could hit the House floor as early as tomorrow. Republicans have a plan. That plan includes raising the debt ceiling, $1.5 trillion to avoid default. That would be in exchange for reining in rampant federal spending, including blocking student loan forgiveness, adding work requirements to social programs, and more. The White House won't even hear it.
The House Republicans' position is unless the president and the Senate agree to their entire agenda, that they're going to default and crash the economy. And that is dangerous. We have been very clear. There will not be any negotiation around the debt ceiling. They did it 3 times in the last administration, and they should do it now. It is unreasonable to put forth what they did last week. It is cruel. That piece of legislation is cruel.
Is it cruel?
Well, look, I think McCarthy is going to win this fight. Over 70% of the American people want them to negotiate. That's the reasonable position. A majority of the American people do not want a debt ceiling that continues the current spending. They're opposed to it. So Biden has taken both in psychology refusal to negotiate and in arguing the will to continue the current massive deficit. He's taken 2 positions that are unpopular, and that helps explain why his poll numbers are so bad. He is really out of touch with the American people, and I think that Biden Democrats run a real risk in 24 of a repudiation on a grand scale. And I think Speaker McCarthy has set this up pretty effectively. Now, he's still got to get votes this week, so right. I think he's got to roll up his sleeves and find the last 5 or 6 votes. But if he does, and they pass something that is significant, it puts, I think, the Senate Democrats in a real bind. And I think at that point, Biden he'll face so many Democrats asking him to negotiate that in the end, he will break and he'll negotiate.
It's already starting to happen. And I mean, we know how brilliant you are, but you were so brilliant because you forecast what's going on the right too. So I had on Congressman Andy Biggs yesterday, who supports this whole process. We got to cut. He doesn't like the ceiling where McCarthy is. So for those 4 or 5 votes, Speaker McCarthy might want to drop by Biggs's office, and so they can work that out, and he has all the votes that he needs when he takes this. But you already knew that somehow. Good to see you.
Harris, when I was Speaker, we occasionally went to the floor with 15 minutes to go, and we were 5 or 6 votes short. And you had to spend the whole time on the floor figuring out how to get the last 5 or 6 votes. I have a hunch that Kevin's smarter than I am, so they'll probably have the votes before the vote starts. But clearly there are a couple of things they're going to have to clear up and make sure they have the votes. If they do, he's in a very strong position. And I think the country, you've already seen, for example, Senator Manchin endorse what McCarthy's doing. You've seen a dozen Democrats come out and say the president has to negotiate. So I think Biden right now is on a losing strategy.
We will cover every second. And so glad that you were here for some of those seconds. Good to see you.
With you.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.